She walked into the room as a maid's daughter and left as the heir to an empire. At just 16, Chiara Mendez faced a room full of billionaires who laughed at her, until her name was read in the will. But this wasn't just about inheritance, it was about justice. What she did next shocked the nation, changed lives, and redefined power forever. Who was this quiet teenager no one saw coming? You'll want to hear every second of her unbelievable journey. Where are you watching from? Drop your city below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that hit you right in the soul. Chiara Mendez paused at the edge of the marbled hallway, her fingers tightening around the strap of her canvas bag. Everything about the Valmont estate screamed wealth. The gleaming chandelier above her head, the oil paintings of dead men who had probably never smiled, and the hush of judgment that followed her steps like a shadow. She stood out, and she knew it. 16, brown-skinned, with her curly hair pulled into a neat puff and wearing a faded denim jacket over a plain white dress, Chiara didn't belong here. At least not in the eyes of the room already half filled with people dressed like they'd come to close $1 billion deal. Not listen to a dead man's will. Who let the intern in? Someone muttered from across the room. A chuckle followed. Chiara didn't flinch. Her eyes moved toward the grand table at the center, where a dozen sleek chairs stood like soldiers, awaiting their rightful commanders. But no one invited her to sit. Not yet. Near the head of the table, Ethan Valmont leaned back in his chair, one leg crossed lazily over the other, his designer blazer hanging open to reveal a shirt probably worth more than Chiara's monthly rent. His smirk was sharp, meant to cut. "Are you lost?" he asked. "Or are you here to clean up after the meeting?" Someone laughed. Probably Juliette Valmont, his mother, who didn't bother hiding the way she curled her lip at Chiara's presence. Must be one of the charity cases Lionel took in. God knows he had a weakness for strays. Chiara's hands remained still at her sides, but her heart beat hard against her ribs. This wasn't the first time she'd been treated like she was invisible, or worse, a mistake someone forgot to usher out. She breathed in through her nose and stared at the empty seat at the far end of the table. The one no one dared to take. Lionel Valmont's chair. Ms. Irene Clark entered the room a moment later, dressed in charcoal gray with a leather briefcase that clicked shut like a verdict. Her presence silenced the low murmurs, though Juliette managed an exaggerated sigh and Ethan rolled his eyes. Without a word, Miss Clark scanned the room, then looked directly at Chiara. "Miss Chiara Mendez," she said, her voice clear and formal, "please take this seat beside me." The entire room stiffened. Ethan choked on his drink. Juliette's perfectly manicured hand froze midair, her espresso cup hovering an inch from her lips. One of the uncles, Chiara didn't know his name, whispered, "Did she say Mendez?" Chiara walked across the room slowly, her spine straight. Her footsteps echoed like defiance. She sat where Miss Clark indicated, placing her bag gently on the floor and folded her hands in her lap. No one spoke. They were too busy trying to understand what just happened. "Excuse me," Ethan said, his voice no longer playful. "Do you even know who she is?" "I do," Miss Clark replied evenly. "And soon, you all will too." Juliette stood up. "This is outrageous. She's the maid's daughter. What right does she have to be here?" Chiara finally spoke, her voice calm and precise. "The same right that brought you here, a connection to Lionel Valmont." It wasn't the answer they expected, and it wasn't the one that would calm them down. But it was true. And that truth would soon unravel every expectation, every hierarchy, every delusion that had kept people like Chiara on the outside looking in. She didn't come for revenge. She came because Lionel had invited her. Because something was about to change. Miss Clark opened the leather briefcase with the precision of a surgeon, sliding out a thick stack of documents and a sleek black remote. The room remained silent except for the subtle sound of papers being arranged. Chiara sat motionless beside her, eyes forward, as if bracing herself for impact. Around them, the Valmont family vibrated with discomfort, confusion, and concealed rage. Juliette had not sat down. Ethan fidgeted with his cufflinks. No one could decide if this was a stunt or a crisis. "Before I proceed with the formal reading of Lionel Valmont's final testament," Miss Clark began, "he requested that this video message be played first." She pointed the remote toward a hidden projector panel in the ceiling. With a soft mechanical hum, the screen unfurled from behind a tapestry, and the lights dimmed. The image of Lionel Valmont appeared, older, frailer than they remembered him, but his voice still carried weight. His eyes, deep and dark, swept the room through the camera as if reading their minds from beyond the grave. "If you're watching this," Lionel began, "then I've passed, and knowing you all, you've gathered not out of grief, but to divide what remains of my empire." His pause was deliberate, scathing. "But before we discuss numbers, I want to ask a simple question. Who here can tell me the full name of Rosa Mendez's daughter?" Kiara felt her throat tighten, but she held her posture. All eyes shifted nervously, trying to recall a name they'd never bothered to remember. Lionel continued, his expression hardening. "She's been in this house since she was 11. She helped her mother clean your rooms, scrubbed your floors, picked up the broken glass you left behind after your drunken parties, and not once did any of you ask for her name." A quiet, burning shame crept through the room like smoke. Juliet looked down. Ethan scoffed and crossed his arms, but his jaw tensed. "I watched her," Lionel said. "Watched how she studied late into the night after working all day. I watched her walk home through snow, soak through her sneakers, just to get her mother's medication. I watched her sneak into my library to read architecture textbooks that none of you even noticed existed." Miss Clark turned off the screen. The silence was brutal. Juliet finally snapped. "What is this? Are we seriously entertaining the fantasy of a teenager cleaning our house being worthy of, what, a scholarship?" "You assume Lionel was playing games," Miss Clark said calmly. "But I'm here to tell you otherwise." She lifted the first page of the will. "As per Mr. Lionel Valmont's final declaration, dated 8 months prior to his passing, he bequeaths 49% of the controlling shares in Valmont Holdings to Miss Kiara Mendez." Ethan stood so fast his chair clattered backward. "What the hell are you talking about? That's not possible." Juliet's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "This is coercion. This is elder abuse." Miss Clark didn't blink. Everything was documented. "We have medical certifications affirming Mr. Valmont's sound mind. We have recordings, witnesses, and receipts. And if you want to test the legality, you're welcome to take it to court. But I warn you, Mr. Tyke Valmont prepared for every possible objection." Another screen slid down. A second video began. Lionel again, this time seated in his study, papers before him. "I know they'll say I was manipulated," he said. "But the truth is, Kiara resisted me. She told me she didn't want charity. She wanted opportunity. She didn't ask for money. She asked for a way to help her community. That's when I knew she was the only one worthy of carrying the legacy I had built." Juliet stumbled back into her seat. Ethan stared, speechless. Kiara lowered her eyes for a moment, then looked up, meeting their gaze without fear. Not because she was trying to prove she belonged, because deep down she always had. The uproar had barely died down when Miss Clark calmly turned to the next envelope in her briefcase and laid out a new set of documents on the table. The seal on each page gleamed under the chandelier light. "These are legally binding property transfers," she said, "authorized and signed by Mr. Lionel Valmont and Miss Kiara Mendez during the final month of his life." Kiara stood now, her voice firm and even, though her fingers trembled slightly at her sides. "Several of these properties," she said, "are located in neighborhoods that were forcibly cleared decades ago to build Valmont developments. Projects that earned this family millions, but left hundreds of families displaced." Juliet shot to her feet again. "This is a setup. You can't just give away commercial land." "I already did," Kiara replied without hesitation. "As of this morning, deeds were filed. Families who were once removed now own their homes, free and clear." Gasps filled the room. Ethan's mouth hung open. A distant uncle cursed under his breath. "You gave away Valmont property?" Ethan hissed. "Are you insane?" "I'm not interested in ownership," Kiara said softly. "I'm interested in justice." Miss Clark nodded toward the door and a group of 5 people entered. 3 women, 2 men, all dressed modestly, some with lines of hardship carved into their faces. Kiara turned to the stunned family. "These are the members of the transition board. They'll assist in the management of Valmont Holdings during my interim status until I turn 18. "What?" Ethan barked. "You think we're going to hand the company over to janitors and union leaders?" A gray-haired woman in the group stepped forward. "You don't remember me, do you, Mr. Valmont? I'm Adira Chen. I designed the East Side Project layout 10 years ago. You presented it as your own." Ethan blinked, unsure if he should deny it or pretend to care. Juliet scoffed. "You can't seriously think these people are equipped to handle corporate operations." "They're more equipped than any of you," Miss Clark interjected smoothly. "Each one of them has decades of experience, overlooked and suppressed because they came from the wrong neighborhoods or dared to demand equity. They understand the systems your family refused to change." Kiara took a slow breath and addressed the entire room. "You think I'm doing this to hurt you? I'm not. I'm doing this because someone finally gave me the power to do what you never had the will to do. Make this empire worthy of the people who built it." "You're dismantling everything my grandfather created," Ethan spat. "No," Kiara said. "I'm redefining it." A flash of movement caught her attention, someone in the back trying to leave quietly, but Kiara's voice stopped them. "There's more," she said, "because this isn't about shame, it's about change." Miss Clark tapped the table. "Beginning today, Valmont Holdings will implement a new revenue-sharing model. A percentage of all net profits will go to employees at every level, not just executives, entry-level staff, cleaners, maintenance, drivers, people whose labor keeps this company running." Juliet's face twisted in disbelief. "You're going to bankrupt us." "No," Kiara answered. "We'll probably lose some short-term investors, but others are already calling. Investors who care about long-term sustainability and ethics." The room had shifted. The air had changed. The power dynamic was no longer theoretical. It had been enacted. Ethan slumped in his chair. "You'll regret this," he said bitterly. Kiara turned her gaze to him, calm, unwavering. "Maybe, but I'll never regret trying to make this world better for someone who comes after me." And with that, she returned to her seat. Not as a guest, not as a maid's daughter, but as the new architect of a different future. 4 months had passed since that unforgettable reading of the will, and the world outside the Valmont estate had changed faster than anyone could have predicted. Though inside those walls, some members still clung to denial like a lifeline. In the heart of the city, the old Valmont headquarters no longer bore the sterile aura of corporate greed. Its lobby buzzed with voices in different languages, community flyers lined the walls, and a new digital sign flashed above the entrance. Valmont Holdings, building equity, not just wealth. Kiara walked through the front doors every morning at 7:30 a.m. sharp, wearing her same worn satchel and a quiet resolve. Though she still attended her high school classes in the afternoons, she devoted her mornings to meetings with advisors, community leaders, and her newly formed board. She didn't pretend to know everything, but she listened, she observed, and she acted. In a brightly lit conference room on the 12th floor, Carlos Estevez, a former data analyst fired 3 years earlier for whistleblowing, now stood by a whiteboard presenting quarterly results. Since implementing the profit-sharing plan and rehiring over 100 unfairly dismissed employees, he said, tapping the chart with a marker, productivity is up by 28%, and public trust? Up 52%. Around the table, Kiara nodded slowly. "Good," she said. "That means we're on the right track. But we can't slow down. We need the East Side Cooperative Housing Project finalized before winter." Just outside the door, Ethan Valmont stood staring through the glass, clutching a cheap leather folder. His once impeccable suit had been replaced by khakis and a thrift store blazer. After months of legal battles, all of which he'd lost, he had finally swallowed the pride that had once defined him. He was there to apply to the Valmont Social Reintegration Program. The irony was suffocating. "Mr. Valmont?" a soft voice called from behind the reception desk. "You can wait in room 3B. Someone will speak with you shortly." He nodded stiffly, not meeting anyone's eyes. A floor below, Juliet sat with a small group of other participants in the corporate bias awareness course, her once perfect posture sagging, her manicured nails chipped. She looked around at faces she never would have spoken to just a year ago. A former line cook, a school janitor, a nurse's aide. People who now discussed books on systemic inequality and urban renewal. And slowly, she was beginning to listen. Meanwhile, Kiara's mother, Rosa Mendez, rested at home for the first time in years, recovering from knee surgery paid for by a new employee health initiative. Kiara had visited her that morning, serving tea before catching the train to the office. "He'd be proud of you," her mother had said quietly, referring to Lionel. Kiara had only smiled. There wasn't time for pride. There was work to be done. As Kiara returned to her office, she found Dr. Benjamin Ross waiting with a tablet in hand. "We've had inquiries from 3 international universities about the Valmont transformation model," he said. "They want to study the shift, how you turned a corporate empire into a community engine." Kiara exhaled. "Tell them it's still a work in progress." That afternoon, she stood by the window overlooking the city. New murals were being painted over abandoned buildings. Kids were playing on the basketball courts they'd helped repave. It wasn't just about buildings or policies. It was about what those spaces represented: dignity, inclusion, hope. The door creaked behind her. Ethan stepped in slowly, holding his resume with both hands. "I know I don't deserve it," he said, "but I want to try." Kiara studied him for a long moment, then gestured to the chair across from her desk. "We all start somewhere." He sat, the silence between them full of history, but also possibility. As the city moved beneath them, the past finally gave way to something new. 1 year later, the building that once symbolized the untouchable privilege of the Valmont dynasty now thrived as a living monument to reinvention. The Valmont Institute for Urban Justice had replaced the private executive wing. Where a golden elevator used to carry board members to exclusive penthouses, now students from across the city rode up with laptops, community maps, and hopes stitched into their backpacks. On the top floor, sunlight flooded Kiara's office, illuminating the mural behind her desk. A sprawling canvas of brown, black, and immigrant hands laying bricks together, signed by artists from the very neighborhoods the Valmonts had once erased from their blueprints. Her desk, made from reclaimed wood, bore no nameplate. She never asked for one. Kiara stood before a group of international journalists, investors, and local leaders gathered for the Institute's first annual summit. At 17, still in her senior year of high school, she now commanded the room not through charisma or authority, but with quiet, unwavering purpose. She spoke without notes. "We didn't change this company by flipping names on an org chart," she said. "We changed it by reimagining who it should serve. Power doesn't have to be built on exclusion. It can be built on dignity, and when it is, it becomes unstoppable." Applause rippled through the room, but Kiara's eyes landed not on the dignitaries, but on the first 2 rows, filled with scholarship recipients, youth organizers, and community elders. Rosa Mendez sat among them, her face soft with pride, her hands folded calmly in her lap. Nearby sat Dr. Ross, nodding slowly. And at the far end of the aisle, in a gray intern uniform, sat Ethan Valmont. He still shifted uncomfortably in his chair, still occasionally avoided eye contact, but he was there. He had completed the full reintegration program, volunteered at shelters, assisted with housing applications, and enrolled in a night course on public policy. He hadn't changed overnight, but he had changed. After the summit, Kiara returned to her office, where Carlos Estevez placed a report on her desk. Last quarter's growth, 15%, and the West Side housing project, 300 more families moved in this week. She smiled. "Let's make it 500 by winter." Outside the glass walls, the city looked different. Not just cleaner or newer, but alive in a way it hadn't been. Worker cooperatives were thriving, public parks had reopened with community programs, and murals stretched across rooftops like declarations of resilience. Back downstairs, Juliet stood by the front door, waiting for the carpool van that would take her to her final workshop. She wore simple clothes now, no diamonds, no brands. As she stepped outside, she paused to glance back at the building that used to be her family's crown. She didn't cry, but something in her chest cracked open. For the first time, she understood what Lionel had tried to teach them all along. In a quiet cafe a few blocks away, Kiara sketched the outline of a new building design: modular, sustainable housing units meant for refugees. She sipped tea and listened to conversations around her in Vietnamese, Spanish, and Creole. This was the city she loved. Not the skyline, but the people who never made it into the skyline's reflection. Dr. Ross joined her at the table. "Do you ever miss being anonymous?" he asked. She smiled, setting her pencil down. "Sometimes, but then I remember, we were never truly invisible. We were just waiting for someone to stop looking past us." Later that night, on the anniversary of Lionel's passing, Kiara visited his grave. No cameras, no press, just her, a single candle, and the promise she had made him. She placed a folded letter beneath the stone, one she'd written months ago, full of updates, failures, victories, and gratitude. As she stood, she whispered, "You didn't just give me a company. You gave me the chance to rewrite the rules, and I will never stop." The wind carried her words into the trees, and for a moment the world held its breath, because somewhere in that stillness, a revolution had not ended. It had only just begun. Sometimes, the most powerful revolutions don't come with noise. They begin with someone quietly refusing to accept injustice as the norm. Kiara's story isn't just about inheritance or a dramatic fall from grace for the powerful. It's about how true leadership is rooted not in domination, but in compassion. It reminds us that when given the opportunity, those who have been underestimated, dismissed, or silenced can rebuild not only broken systems, but broken spirits. This story teaches us that legacy isn't defined by money, land, or titles. It's defined by impact, by who you lift up, not what you hold on to. Lionel Valmont realized too late that true power comes not from control, but from the courage to pass the torch to someone who sees beyond self-interest. And Kiara, a girl no one in that boardroom had ever expected to matter, redefined what power could look like: thoughtful, inclusive, and deeply transformative. Change doesn't come when we swap one elite for another. It comes when we dismantle the walls that keep people out and build bridges that let everyone in. Kiara didn't seek revenge. She sought understanding, and that made all the difference. Where are you watching this story from? Drop your city or country in the comments. We'd love to know where our community is growing. And if this story touched you, inspired you, or made you reflect, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. More stories like this are coming. Stories that remind us that hope, when nurtured with vision and heart, really can change the world.